Hi guys, it's Miss Smith. It's time for another lesson all about solving equations. So what we were learning about last week was a lot of substitution. So we had an equation with a variable and we substituted a number for the variable. This time we're going to have an equation and we're actually going to have to solve to figure out what that variable equals. So it's kind of a little bit different than what we did last week, but still solving equations. So get ready to take some notes and learn all about solving equations for variables.
Today we're going to be talking about solving equations, and I want us to learn about how to solve for a variable. So it's important to understand that an equation is two equivalent expressions. So in the last couple weeks we've been talking about solving expressions where we were substituting the variable for a specific number. This time we're going to be working with equations, which means we're going to have an equal sign and we're going to have some numbers on either side of the equal sign. The biggest thing we want to do is isolate the variable, which means to get it by itself on one side of the equation. We're going to do this by using the inverse operation on both sides of the equation. We're going to start by adding and subtracting to zero out any constants. And then what you want to do on the other side of the equation must be done on, what you want to do on one side of the equation must be done on the other side of the equation. So we have to keep it balanced. So now we're going to try 8 different practice problems. We're going to start with one-step equations and then move into two-step equations. Our first equation is x minus 3 equals 4. Now, like I said, we want to use the inverse operation when we want to zero out our constants. So what's the inverse of subtraction? Hopefully you said the inverse is addition. So negative 3 plus 3 equals 0. If I do that to the left, I have to do that to the right. So 4 plus 3 equals 7. I now have x by itself, so x equals 7. Our next equation is 3m equals 12. Now this means 3 times m. So we want to think 3 times what would equal 12. Now since we're doing multiplication, I need to use the inverse operation to make sure m is all alone. What is the inverse of multiplication? Hopefully you said the inverse of multiplication is division. So 3 divided by 3 equals 1. That now means that it's 1 times m on the left side of the equation. And that's just the same as m. Now, since we've done that to the left side of the equation, we have to go and do that to the right side. When I do 12 divided by 3, I get 4. So that means m equals 4, or 3 times 4 equals 12. Our next practice problem is n plus 8 equals 12. So now I need to think, what's the inverse of addition? The inverse of addition is subtraction. So I need to do 8 minus 8 equals 0. If I do that to the left, I have to do that to the right. So I need to do 12 minus 8, which equals 4. The n is left all by itself, so n equals 4. Or in other words, 4 plus 8 equals 12. Our next practice problem is a tricky one, so make sure you pay close attention. 2/3 times a equals 20. Now what's going to be the inverse of multiplying 2/3 by a? This means I need to think 2/3 and then some operation and some number needs to equal 1. Fractions are special, so we're actually not going to use the inverse of multiplication. We're going to use the reciprocal fraction. We are still going to multiply, but we're going to multiply by this fraction's reciprocal. Can you guys remember what the word reciprocal means? Hopefully you remembered that this means we need to flip the numerator and the denominator. So what we're going to be doing is 2/3 times 3/2. That's going to equal 1, or 6/6. So now the left side of the equation says 1 times a. But if I multiply by 3/2 on the left, I have to still multiply by 3/2 on the right. Now remember, when we multiply a whole number by a fraction, we need to make our whole number a fraction. And we do this by writing it over 1. And then we can do top times top and bottom times bottom. Pause the video here to figure out what the answer is before continuing. So if we did 20 over 1, we have 20 times 3, which equals 60. And 1 times 2 equals 2. So that means A equals 60 over 2. But that's an improper fraction, so what is it written properly? If you said A equals 30, give yourself a nice big pat on the back. So let's start talking about some two-step problems. This time we have 2y plus 3 equals 10. Now we're going to have to do two different operations in order to ensure y is by itself. Like I said at the beginning of the video, we always want to start by zeroing out our constants. So I want to remove that 3 on the left side of the equation. Now I have plus 3, which means I need to do the inverse of it. I know that 3 minus 3 equals 0, so I need to do 10 minus 3 to equal 7. My new equation says 2y equals 7. Now 2 is being multiplied by y, so I need to do the inverse of that to ensure the y is by itself. If I divide by 2, I like to write my division as a fraction. The 2 over 2 gets canceled out, so y is left all alone. And then that's equal to 7 over 2. But that's an improper fraction, so what does that really equal to? Hopefully you said that y equals 3 1/2. Now I want to look at a problem that has a negative number. 3 equals negative 2 plus x. We're going to do the exact same thing to cancel out this constant. Since it's a negative 2, we need to use the inverse by adding 2. Negative 2 plus 2 equals 0, and 3 plus 2 equals 5. So all I'm left with is 5 equals x. Okay, we've got some more negatives. Negative 11 plus m equals negative 2. Now again, when working with negative numbers, we need to use the inverse, which will be addition. So I'm going to do negative 11 plus 11 to equal 0. If I do negative 11 plus 11 on the left, I have to do the same thing on the right. Negative 2 plus 11. Now that's a tricky one. We haven't really talked too much about this. Can you guys figure out what negative 2 plus 11 equals? If you picture this on a number line, we're at negative 2 and we need to count up 11 spaces. If we go up 2 spaces, we're at 0. And 11 minus 2 equals 9, so that means we have 9 more spaces to go. So m equals 9. Our last equation for today, 5x minus 18 equals 62. So again, we need to isolate the variable, starting by removing our constant. So I need to look at the minus 18 part and do the inverse to get 5x on one side and a constant on the other. Now, negative 18 plus 18 equals 0, and 62 plus 18 equals 80. So my new equation says 5x equals 80. 5 times x, that's multiplication. So to do the inverse, I need to do division and divide by 5 from each side. 5x divided by 5, those two 5's cancel out and I get left with x by itself. Then I have 80 divided by 5. Again, I can write division as a fraction. So for me, that's usually the easier way to write it when setting up these equations. So what does x equal if x equals 80 divided by 5? X equals 16. Give yourself a round of applause if you got this question correct. I hope you guys learned something, so now I want you to go and try some practice problems on your own.